Wasa Distance Education. This is NBV3E, Grade 11 Native Studies, and of course is Beliefs, Values, and Aspirations of Aboriginal Peoples in Contemporary Society. I'm Pete, and I'm your teacher. So we're just wrapping up week number 2, and we're also going to wrap up Unit 1 today. So that's going to be great. We're going to finish off Lesson 5. Okay, sorry about that rough start there. Sometimes you don't press all the buttons you're supposed to, I guess. So yesterday we were looking at Lesson 5, which had to do with the modern economy and some of the challenges of that economy. Now, if you'll remember, we kind of looked at how things were pre-contact, right? How Aboriginal people in Canada were trading, but it wasn't the type of trade that happened once the fur trade started and then once the modern economy kicked in. It was I think a much more low level trade. They would um, have some excess of materials and resources, and they would trade those for resources that were not available in their area. Okay, so it was a pretty low key kind of thing, low level sort of thing. But then the modern economy came along and changed pretty much everything. Okay, so we looked at some important phrases, of course. We talked about different ideas there. And the different types of communities that developed, right? So Aboriginal people, instead of moving around and sort of following resources, moving from one place to another, depending on the time of year, they were required by the new country, Dominion of Canada, to settle in communities. Okay, so that created some changes, quite a bit in the way that the economy operated. Okay, we also looked at how transportation changed things. In that, here I get this on the screen here. So transportation changed things because now um, people weren't traveling by water. That was originally kind of how things went. Travel was by water, by canoe on rivers, um, and now the travel was by aircraft and by train. Okay, and that changed things. Okay, and now air is still very expensive, but it does open up remote places. Okay. So the okay, so here we go. Now, basically, understand that when you're looking at the unit, you're supposed to look at the unit in kind of in a context with the course text. Okay, so you are supposed to have this course text. I've been putting some of the pages up on my Facebook page, and I've been showing you the pages here, but really, you really need to get a hold of the text from your DEC. And if your DEC doesn't have one, they have to get a hold of me really soon. It's going to take a little bit of time to get that. Okay, so the parts of the text we were looking at was mostly from page 85 onwards in the course text, and that's the unit. It's actually a whole unit on economy and the economy, the changes in the economy. Okay. So what we were looking at then, we'd looked at page 92 of the text, which is talking about a resurgence, um, and I'm really talking about maybe 1970s, 1980s. That's where Aboriginal people started really, um, it, in started developing. Um, well, let's take a look at the pages and we'll make sure we get this exactly right. Okay, so this is page 92. Okay, so there we go. So, and I'm going to zoom in here, zoom, see if I can do this. And, okay, so here it is right here, page 92 of your text. It said rapid industrial development and increased harvesting of resources have resulted in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples becoming more involved in not only what happens on their lands, but also how they may benefit fairly from those developments, right? So they're really not just accepting the fact that somebody comes in and takes their lumber, takes their gold, takes the diamonds, whatever they can find, but they want a voice in that. They want to approve it or not, and they certainly want to share in any profit that's made, right? So, and that's really what they're saying. Okay, so here's an example where the First Nations, um, Lubicon Lake Nation, um, where they were frustrated by the changes. Okay. All right, so here's more specific, and this is at the bottom of page 92, sort of more specific information about what kind of was coming about in the 1970s and 1980s. So it's a while ago, but they were kind of setting the stage for what's happening now. So in the 1970s and 80s, thriving sectors attracted workers across Canada. There was an oil boom in Alberta, and we know about that. Greater forestry exports in British Columbia, and increased fishing exports in Nova Scotia. This expansion drove population growth, which in turn boosted the production of goods and services. Some First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities also underwent rapid development, commercialization, and change. So commercialization, we probably should understand what that word means, right? That's where, um, because it may not necessarily be clear what it means. So we could go on Google and just look it up. And what I'm doing here, I'm just gonna type it into my phone here. So I'm gonna type define, okay, define, and then colon, and then commercialization. Mercialization. And I have to be careful because um, if you're typing an unfamiliar word on your phone, autocorrect can change it. Okay, so here's the definition I get. Commercialization is the process or cycle of introducing a new product or production method into the market. Okay, the term often connotes, especially, the entrance into the mass market as opposed to earlier niche markets, but it also includes a move from the laboratory into even limited commerce. So really what they're saying then, commercialization. So let's say that historically a community sold art on a kind of a piece basis, right? And then when commercialization hits, the whole focus is on selling a lot of art in a kind of a wide way, making lots and lots of art and kind of making it available, and really putting a whole bunch of people behind it, making art. So that's right. So it's a different thing. Let's say fishing, right? Maybe prior to commercialization, some families are going down and they're fishing, and then they have some extra fish, so they'll sell it to local townspeople, or maybe they'll freeze it and they might sell it here and there outside of the community. But commercialization means that now, it's a whole bunch of people are going down and they're developing the fish um, resource. They're selling it. They maybe have some sort of online sales where anybody can order some fish and it'll be frozen and sent to them. So it's a big thing, right? It's a different kind of um, a different kind of commerce. Okay, so, and of course that's change, right? That's a very different way of approaching, um, making your living and kind of being around, right? You're not just getting a little bit more of the resource than you need, and you're getting a lot more of it, and then using that to get money and use that to buy other things. Okay, so then it goes on to say many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people have sought employment in emerging sectors, usually through seasonal or yearly contracts. However, lack of professional training for Aboriginal people has resulted in limited involvement at management levels. Although the number of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people with formal education has increased, most still work as laborers or seasonal workers. Increasingly, specialized training and mentoring programs have become part of agreements negotiated between Aboriginal peoples and corporations. These programs can include job shadowing, firefighting, and truck driving courses, and medical training. Right. So there you go. So when a company comes in to a First Nations land, right, the traditional land, and they want to exploit some resource, so the First Nations are saying, fine, we have to get a share of the profits. It has to be sustainable, right? So you have to put it back the way it was after you're done. And we don't just want jobs, we want training, right? So don't just give us some job. We want a job that leads to something that can build us up, right? Train it, train or get more skills, right? And allow a person to progress within that company. Okay, not just going and just working and just working for an hourly rate, and then that's it, right? So that's what they're asking for, and that's a good way, and that has uh, a history in other places, in other countries have actually done that, where they've had a lot of people who lacked training, who lacked skills, education, and then the country, for however in different ways, have emphasized training and professional development and things like that, and then it sort of builds up the people, and it changes it changes the poverty levels. It changes um, the standard of living. It changes everything. Okay, but it takes time and it takes a focus as well, right? A lot of people have to really believe in it and kind of be, uh, pushing for it. Okay. So yeah, so the last little bit of that then is it says becoming more involved in sector planning gives Aboriginal communities more opportunities for communication and cooperation, including increased protection of their traditional beliefs, values, and lands. Right, so there you go. Okay, so when the big gold mine wants to come onto your land and dig a big hole, right, they have to do it in a way that respects the beliefs of the people, right? That's what it's seeing. So whatever that is, right? If there's something that has to be done to make sure that the people's traditions are respected, when that big gold mine comes in there, then those gold miners are going to have to do that, or else they're not going to get access to the land. That's what taking control is all about. Okay. Now, they talk about business development, and I guess we can just talk about that a little bit. Um, so it says many Aboriginal people own and operate businesses involving resource development and sustainability. Right? Respect for the land does not disallow making a living from the land. Right? And of course, we think about the fur trade, right? But it should be done responsibly, right? Which makes sense. It makes if you think about the future and the future generations that are going to want to use the land, it has to still be there, and it has to still have everything in it, right? And so that's what we're talking about responsibly. Right? So, if you're going to have fishing, right? Then, like, say you're going to get people to come to a community, and you'll have guides, and you'll have canoes, and you'll give them all the things they need to go fishing. You'll show them where the good fishing spots are, but you can't have so many people fishing from outside the community that it's going to deplete all the fish, right? So that's the responsible thing. And we're actually going to talk about sustainable development just in a few minutes here. Okay, so if that's something that really is important, um, and especially if it's based on the land, right, and using the land in these businesses. Okay. So it says here the challenges involved in developing various resources while maintaining rights to the land and its resources are complex. Still, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people insist on being consulted on projects, especially those that involve ecological concerns. Many support the creation of partnerships among Aboriginal peoples, corporations, and governments. By making these challenges public and by being proactive, Aboriginal peoples are trying to ensure the success of their communities both in the present and in the future. So, for example, with the gold mine or whatever, if all the communities where there might be gold um, make it clear that nobody's going to go and dig a big hole unless it's sustainable and unless there's development opportunities for the community and things like that, and it respects traditional beliefs. Then the big companies are either they'll go in prepared to do that, or they won't try. They won't waste anybody's time, and that's what they're saying there. That if everything's public, right? If their requirements are public, then the companies will know when they approach a community about using their land, they will know what to expect. Okay? And they'll be able to do it in a more respectful way. I think it makes sense, and it works for everybody. Okay. So now on the bottom of page 93, they just talk about wild rice harvesting. Okay, so now they talk, and this is just one example of an industry. So it says traditionally harvesting wild rice was a very social activity. Families would set up camps along waterways where rice grew, and everyone helped with the gathering and storing of the rice, which is actually the seed of a wild grass. The Ojibwe name is Kagiwiosa Manoman, which says they translate in English good berry, good berry. To harvest the time-honored way, one person is in charge of maneuvering the canoe through the tall grasses, while the other person uses two sticks to collect the rice, one to gently bend the stalk over the canoe, and the other to tap the stalks and gently loosen the ripe kernels. The process must be done carefully in order not to break the stalks, which will continue to yield more rice. The wild rice must be dried soon after the harvest to prevent mold. And once it's dry, the rice is hulled to remove the chaff from the kernel. The methods of hulling are thrashing the kernel with a stick, churning or treading on the kernels. Before storing the rice, the harvesters must separate the broken pieces of chaff from the kernels. The rice could be stored in animal skin bags, birch bark containers, or woven baskets. In contrast, non-traditional rice harvesting involves collecting the rice mechanically while a boat is driven at about 20 kilometers per hour through the grass. This method allows a single person to harvest more rice at a faster rate. So, wow, so think about that, the difference, right? When it's done um, as a family thing, as it's done, they're harvesting a resource just to get enough for the family and maybe a little bit more to sell. Then the family's involved, and then they kind of paddle their canoe through the grass. But once it becomes commercialized, commercialization sets in. Now you have a big machine kind of rampaging um, through the grass, right? So, which may be okay as long as it's sustainable, as long as that machine doesn't permanently damage the rice stalks and it doesn't damage the the swamp, right? Uh, So that's how it happens there. Okay. So now I'm curious if you've ever harvested wild rice. That would be kind of a interesting thing. I think it's around here, but I don't really know. Um, I know when I was growing up, we there were things that we got off of our land anyway. Wild strawberries, which are very tiny. A lot of work to get wild strawberries. Um, and they're, yeah, you have to get down and sort of crawl around in the grass and get the wild strawberries. What was really fun, we don't have blueberries where I'm from, down in um, the Ottawa Valley. We really don't have blueberries here, but what we have are raspberries, big, juicy raspberries. And around August, they start to get ripe. And of course, we all knew where the best raspberries were, the bushes, and that was great. But again, that was something where we'd go and we'd get a couple of pails of raspberries, and have enough to make some pies or some jam or something. And we really couldn't sell it because we were just picking it by hand, and we had no interest in selling it. We just wanted to just get enough, uh, so that we could have some raspberries. We didn't have to buy them. All right. So now we talked about sustainable development, um, and this is an important idea, right? That you can't cut down the raspberry bush. You can't wreck the wild rice blades in the process of getting the rice, right? You have to be able to go back and get some more, right? Forever. So this is on page, let's see, page 94. So it says sustainable development advocates the use of resources in a way that meets human needs while also preserving the environment so that the needs can be met both in the present and the future. This idea became popular in the 1970s and it is still widely used today. However, this concept has been around since the beginning of time for many Aboriginal peoples and is the seven generations teaching of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee. Um, for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, sustainable development considers the following key aspects. Okay, so we did this one yesterday, but it's worth looking at it again. Earth is a life-giving force that is to be respected. There is a time and season for all activities. Okay, so that's really important. Sometimes yeah, you gotta do things at the right time. Take only what you need. Balance is needed among the four basic elements of nature: air, which provides life; earth, which provides life-sustaining resources and food; fire, which provides heat and light; and water, which makes life and growth possible. Everyone and everything has a place and a role, and no person, animal, or thing is to be taken for granted. And then it says these aspects of sustainable development are essential in creating a world that can provide for everyone now and in the future. Right? So, those raspberry bushes that we used to pick the raspberries, so I'm sure they're still there, right? As long as someone didn't come and cut them all down to build something or to put a fence up or something like that, they should all still be there, right? And so whenever we go out somewhere, we gotta be really, really careful. Okay. And then yeah, and they talk about sustainable development, and that's really, if we think about sustainable development, and I mentioned this before, if we think about um, you know, um, fiscal responsibility, financial responsibility, and governments, um, spending more money than they have, right? Deficit spending is what it's called. Okay, that is a type of, if you consider money to be a resource, that's a type of unsustainable development. Spending more money than the government has, it burdens future generations. The future generation is going to have to pay back that money. There's going to be less money available for them for the same things that we needed it for. Okay, so that's kind of the same idea, right? As um, sustainable development for resources. The difference is that if, for example, the wild rice has to still be there, right? The fish have to still be there for, the children and their children and so on. Okay. So that's when we think about um, industry, business, and commercialization, we still have to think about that, right? We can't take too many fish, right? We're taking more, but we can't take so many that there's none left. Okay. So that was the sustainable development part. Let's take a look at the, oops, sorry about that. So now there are some support questions here in the unit. So let's go take a look at those support questions because they may help us to understand the course material a little bit. Okay. So unit 1, then page 32. Yeah, we're just right at the very end here. Um, so here's the support question. Now remember, this is to help you understand um, the course material, and it's to help you get prepared to do the key questions which you hand in. You don't send in the support question. So it says, what effects do you think the rapid change brought on by development has had on the worldviews of Aboriginal peoples? Okay, so what effects do you think the rapid change brought on by the development has had on the worldviews of Aboriginal peoples? Okay. Now, if you think back to yesterday when we started this lesson, and I asked you a question, and the question was, would you be able to go without online shopping? That was the question, right? Would you be able to go without online shopping? And that was really kind of to get you thinking about your worldview and maybe how things have changed for you and your generation, right? Um, and I don't know. Um, we all have different worldviews and different needs, right? And I talked about my own need. Where if you're sure, I like being on the land. I like going out outside. But if I need something that will help me, like a pair of snowshoes or some boots or something, I'll buy them online, right? So I kind of need that. So, and that's where worldview comes in, right? Could you be okay without having any technology or, you know, um, this is the thing, right? So, worldview, okay. And then the other idea of that, if that's one possible way to answer that question. But another possible approach to answering that question is to say something like this: how would you feel about, say, somebody coming in with a diamond mine on your land, right? How would you feel about that? Okay. And how do you think your parents would have thought about that, or your grandparents, right? And so that, or some of the previous generations, how do you think they would feel about that, right? So how has that changed, right? And maybe it hasn't changed very much at all. So there are different ways to answer that, and remember, there's no right or wrong. This, right? What you would do is just write it doesn't even tell you how much to write. It doesn't tell you how many marks it's worth. So, I'd probably a couple of paragraphs maybe for something like that. As I said, if it really grabs you, if a question like that really grabs you, you can write quite a bit. Okay. And if it's just something that doesn't really interest you to answer a question like that, just do the what just answer the minimum. Okay. That's what I would suggest. Now, you're not sending the support questions in for marking or anything like that. Okay, it's just to get you ready to do the key questions. On the other hand, if you wrote a support question and you really wanted me to look it over, of course you can send it to me. I'm not going to give you a formal mark, but I'd certainly look it over and give you some comments, some feedback on it, okay? Okay, so now the next question, and I don't know, it looks like we have a little bit of a, this has to go back a little bit of a formatting problem. So it says, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people are not represented in planning and managing jobs in resource industries such as mining and forestry. How might this lack of input from Aboriginal peoples affect the choices made by companies in these industries? How might more Aboriginal people become involved in these leadership roles? Okay, so I think this question might be a bit more straightforward to answer, but it's still going to have to think about it, certainly. Okay, so what they're trying to say is, um, let's say that the people that want to make a gold mine here in not too far away from Sioux Lookout, they're making a gold mine. Okay, and they have all these big plans. They're going to dig a big hole. They're going to have a special pond where they put the toxic water that they use. They're going to have a special place where they put all the dirt that they take out of the hole. They're going to pile it up and keep it. And then when they're finished getting all the gold out, they're going to put the dirt back. And it'll be just like it was. That's what the guy was telling us. To be just like it was. Okay, so the question is, are they being advised by Aboriginal people who would really understand what it, how it was, and really what it's going to take to make it that way again? Okay. Um, as a matter of fact, they were showing the water, this water that has all these chemicals in it, and they're going to do something to the water, and then it'll go back into a river that's very close to Dryden. I was really surprised. And they said, "Oh no, it'll be the same quality as any other water." That didn't really sound right, but anyway, but there you go. So would having Aboriginal people making those decisions, maybe they'd put the mine somewhere else. Maybe they'd look a little harder to find gold someplace a little further from people, right? Or maybe not, right? But anyway, they definitely could benefit from that input. Now, here's the other thing, though. So how would Aboriginal people become involved in these leadership roles? Okay, so how do you get to advise people? Okay, so of course, I think we're probably talking about education, right? Okay, if you become a mining engineer or a forester or something like that, a business person, so that then you're working on developing gold mines yourself. That's where you get to make those decisions, right? Because the more education you have, the more specialized education you have, right? Then they'll hire you because you have that knowledge, right? So that's it. There may be some other ways. How do you become involved in leadership roles? Okay. So there may be some other options there. So that gives you an idea of what they're looking for in a question like that. So again, it doesn't tell you how many sentences to write. It doesn't tell you how many marks it's worth. So really, if that question intrigues you, you probably want to write a half a page on it. And if it's just something that says, I don't really know, um, do a little bit of research and write a couple paragraphs. Okay. So that's how you get through that. Okay. Great. Now, let's say you got a question like this and you were reading it and you weren't really sure what it meant. You can always ask your teacher, of course, ask me. Well, I've just tried to explain it to you, but might not still be enough. You could ask someone, right? Just ask someone, hey, could you read this and tell me what you think it means? That's the way people, um, that's the way people solve problems, learn to, right, solve problems. I know it's really kind of tempting to just try and do it yourself, but if you're having some problems, you can ask someone, and that's the way it works. And that person will ask you when they need your help. Okay, it works like that. So let's take a look at key question number 5. This is the last set of questions you hand in. There's only 2 questions, so they're just probably looking for some essays. Now notice here, one of them's worth 10 marks and one's worth 25 marks. So obviously you're going to do most of the work, get most of your marks from question 2. So question 10 is just kind of getting you ready to probably do question 2. Okay. So let's read key question number 1 here. It says, do you think businesses should consider future generations and their need to have safe and clean water, food, and air? How can businesses operate in a more sustainable way? Explain your thoughts in a short opinion piece. Okay? So there are some ways that businesses cannot be sustainable. Okay? Now let's say that you weren't really sure. We all have our own ideas. But one thing you could do is to go on to Google and do a search for sustainable business. And you might even then try sustainable business. You might try sustainable business ideas. You might try sustainable business practices. ACTICES, I think it is, practices, right? So try different combinations of that and see what you can come up with. Check some of the links because that'll give you some ideas to put in your short opinion piece. Now, it doesn't tell you how long, or just says short without really saying like 3 paragraphs or 5 paragraphs is worth 10 marks. So let's think about that. If I have a paragraph with, say, 3 ideas in it, right, with an opening sentence and maybe a closing sentence, how many marks would that be worth? Okay, probably close to, maybe 3 or 4 marks, right? 3 to 4 marks for something like that, right? So maybe you'd be looking then for at 2 of those paragraphs at least, maybe 3 if you want to make absolutely sure you got your 10 marks with 2 or 3 ideas in each one, right? So you have maybe a first one, right? Sustainable businesses. One, you can talk about how businesses can recycle and how businesses can buy their products from other sustainable businesses, right? So that would be your first paragraph. You could explain that. Your second paragraph, you could say that sustainable businesses cost more money, right? Um, so they're going to have to charge more for their products, and then you could address how the business might get around that. Are they going to just charge more? Are they going to advertise that they're sustainable, and so people will buy from a sustainable business? So that's the sort of thing. And then maybe another paragraph explaining, or maybe 2 will work. Maybe 2 is enough. Maybe another paragraph giving some examples of sustainable businesses, right? And how they operate. Okay, so it doesn't have to be a big ordeal. I don't think you're even looking at a page right there, right? But it'll take you a little while to just go and search for some ideas about sustainable business. Okay, and again, if you wanted to do that and have a rough draft or something, send it to me to look over. I'd be happy to look at it. Don't have to formally mark it. You just send it to me. Okay, if you fax it or something, just write on it, just draft for feedback. Okay, so that gets you ready then to do this next one, which is worth 25 marks. So you really wanna make sure you get that correct. It says research businesses that are owned and operated by a First Nations, Métis, or Inuk person. Okay, so are persons. um, For example, you could examine businesses in tourism, farming, manufacturing, communications, or consultation. Choose one business, and present its products or services by creating a promotional item such as a flyer or advertisement for the local paper. Okay? So basically, you're looking for you basically want to understand the business, and especially you just want to understand the business well enough to be able to make an advertisement for it, right? A flyer, right? An advertisement, right? You could do a little PowerPoint if you want. PowerPoint, okay? A presentation if you want. A couple of slides, okay? Right? Or just make a little add up in Word or just on a piece of paper is fine. Okay, so here's what you want. So you want the name of the business, okay, the history of the business, so a brief history of the business. Okay, it's worth 3 marks. So when it was founded by whom, where, how long they've been in business, right? Maybe some changes. Products and services they sell. I think Wasea is that's an example, right? How long they've been around. Products and services, Wasea sells, airline, passenger service, and cargo, air cargo, and possibly charters. I'm not really sure. Environmental sustainability and mission statement, so that will be very important for a First Nation business, right? And so you see it's worth 5 marks. So you just really want to copy their statement. And then the presentation of the promotional item. So the presentation, wow, that's worth 7 marks. Boy, oh boy. Okay, so I'll give you an idea. Okay, so they ask you to make an ad. So I think that if you had a graphic, like a picture or a drawing or something like that, that's probably going to add to it, right? If it's nicely presented, laid out in a nicely graphic way, that's probably worth some more marks as well. Okay. Now, if you're really not that good at that sort of thing, that creativity part, do everything else. And then what I would suggest is get someone that is good, someone that did really well in art in school. Just ask them to look it over and give you some ideas. Again, that's how we we learn stuff. Okay. So get someone to look it over and help you. And that's most people are very happy to do that. Okay. And then spelling and grammar, 3 marks. Okay, look, you'd really have to mangle things very, very badly to lose 3 marks. So, but do try. Okay, use your spell check. Get someone to look it over. Okay, make sure it all makes sense. That's really important. Okay, it has to make sense. All right, so there you go. So 25 marks, and that's what you're looking at. So it's basically just some research and some information about the business, and there you go. You'll be all set. So you do that, you send it in. So I'm thinking, this is, you know, this second one, this could take you an hour, might take you 2 hours, right? It shouldn't take you much longer than that, though. You might be able to do this whole key question in about 90 minutes, right? Number one and number two. Okay. That's what I'm thinking. Anyway, it may seem like a lot of work, but once you get into it, once you find a couple of businesses and you just pick one, that's probably the hardest part. Because then everything else, you got the name of the business, it's going to be there, the history of the business, it'll be on their web page under About usually. That's where you usually find it. It's called About. Hmm. About or About Us. Okay, on their web page. Right, products and services is usually, there right front and center. Okay, environmental sustainability and mission statement usually around somewhere too. Now, if you pick a business and they don't have a mission statement, you might want to pick a different business, right? If they don't have one easily available. Okay, so that was it for Unit 1. So let's take a look now. So we have a few minutes left. So we'll take a look at the where we come in this unit, because as I kind of like to say, sometimes we're not quite ready to learn things. It takes some time. So the first thing that we did then, well, we the first day last week we looked at the study guide. So hopefully you've got that all sorted out and you're able to access the archives and the YouTube channel and everything. Okay. So the first lesson then we looked at worldview. Okay, and this is important. It's important for a couple of reasons. First, we wanted to understand um, what a worldview is, kind of how worldviews develop, and the fact that different people can have different worldviews. Okay, so someone that's from Toronto, okay, and they grew up in Toronto and they haven't really been up north, right? They may have a worldview of what the north is like that's very different than what it really like, or just very different from those of us who've been in the north, right? Or people who were born in the north. Okay. So, and that happens, and we kind of sometimes laugh. People come from down south, and in the middle of winter, and they'll come and they'll be wearing their shoes, and they step off the plane, right? Or they'll be wearing their stylish coat that they paid a lot of money for at some shop in Toronto, and then they get up north and it doesn't have any, it just doesn't keep them warm. But again, that's a worldview, right? And we have to understand that where they're from, that's what they do, right? And it's not really, they're not trying to, um, they- they're not, yeah, I guess that's just their worldview, and they haven't had that experience. That's what I'm trying to say. They haven't had that experience, but once they do, if we treat them with kindness, and I think that they'll be, they can be fine. Some people can be fine. Okay. So, and likewise, if we think about what it's like in Toronto, and I sound down on Toronto. I lived there, so it's, I'm not really. I did live there for a little while anyway, and so I can say that I know Toronto a little bit. I've decided I don't want to live there anymore, so maybe that tells you something. Maybe my worldview wasn't compatible with Toronto, and it's probably true. But some people like it, and some people want to be there. So, and that's fine. So this is what we talk about worldview and how we got to that worldview, right? Part of it, like the way I got to my worldview, is I spent a lot of my formative years out in a very, very rural, remote area in the Ottawa Valley. So, I say I'm from Ottawa, but really, I went to school in Ottawa uh, for some of it, but mostly I grew up in a really just in a pretty remote part of the Ottawa Valley. There wasn't much around, a lot of land. Okay. So what we did then was that we looked at some of the factors that affect your worldview. And we asked you to fill in that chart. So if you haven't done it now, uh, before, maybe now would be a good idea. What are the possible influences on your worldview? Okay, so we asked you to fill in that chart. And I told you a few about me, mainly because if there were people signing in regularly or calling in, we'd have that discussion. But, if you're watching this on the archive, you're just going to have to kind of imagine that we had a big discussion about it, right? And so I talked about some things that influenced my worldview and some that didn't, that I really crossed out, that made no difference whatsoever. My neighborhood, well, maybe I didn't really have a neighborhood, my education certainly influences my worldview. To this day, it does. Part of it is that my worldview is based on the idea that I will never stop learning. I'm always taking courses and always learning new stuff. Because to me, that's important. It's part of my who I am, right? Is somebody that is always looking at education. Okay, life experiences, of course, right? Socioeconomic status. I did have some advantages growing up, so that affects my worldview. It also affected my start in life. I went to some pretty good schools, and that perhaps made a difference, right? Perhaps it made me understand the value of education. So there you go. So that's how you get a worldview, and it's a very complex thing. Okay, and even people in the same family might have a slightly different worldview. Okay, so we're asked to make a list of 5 factors um, that influence your life and give one reason why you chose it. So that was an important thing. Hopefully you can do that one. And remember, that's for you. We're not going to hand it in, and I'm not going to ask you to do that. The definitions, we talked about how to get those definitions. Okay, and so that was unit 1. So that was what we talked about worldview and the importance of language um, that relates everything to culture. Um, the 7 grandfather teachings, okay, history, personal histories, and then of course we asked you to do a research on your parents or somebody's parents, right? It doesn't have to be you. Um, Keep that in mind. Sometimes you don't necessarily want to do a research on your parents, or it's not possible. You can do it on somebody else's parents. Okay. and then a news article. Okay. So then the next thing we looked at was sources of Aboriginal history, and we just really talked about um, how Aboriginal history is presented, right, through storytelling, right, and how the culture is passed on. Okay, we talked about that, and yeah, there we go. Okay, so and then we talked about the medicine wheel and its importance to the Aboriginal culture. Okay, this is a little chart. I think we talked about that anyway. Okay, and then for lesson 3 was the relationship with the land, and we talked about the traditional historical relationship between Aboriginal people and the land. Okay, because that really, when we talk about in trade in the modern economy, the attitudes and the traditional values of um, of Aboriginal people towards the land are part of that conversation now about the modern economy and how the land is used in modern times. Okay, we're asked to do a concept map, and I kind of showed you a little bit, just to kind of try to fill in the key ideas from the textbook pages 39 to 40. So give that one a try. The concept maps are really kind of handy, and it's a good tool to sort of test your understanding, because the way we learn things and the way we make memories in our brains is actually to make those connections. We actually make connections between different pieces of information. So if you're able to visualize that in this kind of organization way, then it means that you've learned it quite well, and it'll stick with you a little longer. Now, the making the bubbles for you may not be the best, but you notice I even made my own bubble over here. Right. So don't feel that you're stuck with the layout that they did. Right. You can draw your own. Okay. Probably probably should. They were trying to make it easier for you, but the fact is that when they give you a layout like that, it actually, for some people, it makes it harder. So feel free to make your own layout. Okay, so and then there were some charts to fill in. So that's a bit of our quick review, and then just before we did this last lesson, we talked about economy, trade, and resources. Okay. And we talked about the different types of trade and economy that was in existence before contact. Talked a little bit about the potlatch and how it was, what it was, and then how it was banned for a while. Okay, and that really had an effect on Aboriginal, in some cases, some of their traditions. Okay, and then finally we did the modern economy. So that is it for Unit 1. Okay, so we're going to be going on. Now, just to let you know, on Monday, the class will be pre-recorded. Okay, so it's fine. It'll just be pre-recorded. If you're not really calling in, it doesn't affect you at all. But if you were thinking of calling in on Monday, you won't be able to because I won't be here. Okay, so the class will be pre-recorded. I'm actually going to Pekanjikam on Monday, and I might not get back in time, so I decided to pre-record it. So for Unit 2 then, we're just gonna keep on going, and we're gonna talk about identity and kind of, yeah, and sort of explore that a little bit, and some other topics in Unit 2. All right, well that's it for me then. So we'll be back on Monday. Remember, there's no class on Friday, and pre-recorded Monday, and then I'll